this ecosystem's decline, it is a lack of focus on what is the essential thing that really makes us poor. And my suggestion, therefore, is of the 45% that we put into debt service, let us assess which are the anomalous debts which were obtained during the martial law years, which are debts which were never really utilized because of bad negotiations. Maybe even if just 2 to 3% of the 45% could be utilized for afforestation, since we have less than 1 million hectares in forests remaining, maybe even 1% for planting of mangroves or to revitalize our coral reefs, being the Amazon of the seas and being the richest of the center of biodiversity in the world. So if the World Bank, the IMF, the United States could think in terms of that, that would be good. And it is nothing new, because the Tropical Conservation Act, a U.S. Congress enacted law, had created the Philippine Tropical Forest Foundation, which allowed $100 million, very small, Philippine debt to the U.S. to be converted into reforestation efforts. So it has been done, it can be done, it must be done, especially during times of recession and the global financial crisis. Thank you.
Eager to get back into that. Actually, that is quite a model, isn't it? That may be acceptable in Western capitals.
Yes, I think it is a model, and it is particularly a relevant model for a country like the Philippines, which suffers from a significant burden of foreign debt. It is not necessarily a model that is applicable to all of the needs, because particularly there where you already pointed out, adaptation requires specific investment, cash on the table to increase the levees and the dikes, to improve the water management, to create the agricultural seeds and hand out the agricultural seeds that are resistant to higher levels of drought. There we actually need incremental money, new money, fresh capital. And the debt forgiveness program would not apply so much to those sort of needs.
So you worry that if you went down the debt forgiveness path, Western governments would say that's enough?
Well, certainly the debt forgiveness, the debt forgiveness part could work very well for the forestry side, where you are talking about the preservation of an asset against which you cross off a liability, to speak in finance terms. But in terms of the needs of adaptation, but also the needs for mitigation in those developing countries that play a more significant role in emissions, we will need to see incremental money. And I think all of us have here observed that the amount of incremental money is actually big, but very modest in comparison to what we've seen over the last 9 months going into the financial crisis.
Lauren's point is that this is a start.
Yeah.
It's one of the options. It's not the only option. It's one of the options. No, I didn't want to interrupt only because David mentioned it. Yes, it's just one of the options that there are probably a dozen nations that could benefit from this sort of an agreement. Yes, but I agree with you in terms of agriculture. For example, new seeds, let's say flood-resistant rice, or rice that can grow during periods of drought. Those are important products of research and technology which perhaps the third world does not have, which perhaps the first world nations could share in terms of technical assistance. R&D, research and development, science and technology is so essential these days, and that exchange of technology and know-how could be part of the package in terms of helping developing nations. I don't want to take away the floor from you.
Well, just a couple of points on the where do we get the financing from. There's a tendency to think of it as solely having to come from the budgets of the exchequers, if you like, of the developed countries, like development assistance does at the moment. But in the climate change arena, we've seen a number of innovative ways of raising funding that doesn't necessarily have to come from that source. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We have, for example, in the mitigation arena, the Clean Development Mechanism, which enables private sector entities, by and large, in developed countries that have targets to invest in projects in developing countries to reduce their emissions, and thereby give them technology and access to new funds, which are outside the domain of any taxpayer-funded national budgets. Similarly, we have on the adaptation side something called the adaptation levy on these CDM projects, which generates, it's a 2% levy on all the project transactions, which generates funding for something called the adaptation fund, which was set up under the Framework Convention. And again, this is for providing adaptation assistance to developing countries, but does not come from developed country exchequers, as it were. And there are a number of proposals on the table from various countries. One of them, for example, from the least developed countries, for a similar adaptation levy to be applied to all international air passenger travel. Air passengers are, you know, one of the polluters. It applies the polluter pay principle. They have a major carbon footprint and have the ability to pay for it. And if you just put a little bit of an adaptation levy on that, would generate in the order of $10+ billion a year for adaptation funds, which would, again, not be coming out of the national exchequer and a budget. So we need to look at innovative ways of raising the funds. Precisely. We find slices to meet the bigger target.
First of all, I don't think we should look at the big picture in a way that will make it difficult for us at the end of the day to get what we want. There are various ways, as we say at home, of skinning cats. And we also have to look at the track record. Number one, if you look at a lot of the major initiatives that have been taken over the years, in Africa we've had our share of those initiatives, from Lagos Plan of Action until the new one we have right now is called what? The amounts of monies that are usually, for example, even pledged to be paid. If you look at the record, you see that literally every 3 to 4 years, nothing has been done. There are various ways of making statements that at the end of the day, they will say that we are recycling the amounts that have been allocated to you, and those funds never come. My worry, and that's the reason why I said that I've been thinking very seriously, my worry is that if we go in with the big monies, which we shouldn't lose sight of, and I agree with you 100%, that it's probably not such a huge amount of money, but in reality, pragmatically, it is big. It is not small. And so let us package things in such a way that they are measurable, they are easy to digest. Let the developed world also know that it's also in their own best interest to put monies in these areas that we've all discussed, and you've got so much literature around here to cover it. If we go that route, our chances are that if we are successful in the first go around, we could get other monies to ride on the back of the successes so that we can move forward. Right now, we have a short-term problem on our hands, that is Copenhagen. It's just around the corner. And then we've got the long haul, how we're going to ensure that the livelihood security of the vulnerable is taken care of, and of course, the future generations. On the short term, I'm not sure right now whether I'm very comfortable with what we're going to present in Copenhagen to entice those who can really put money on the table to perform. If we go with the big numbers, which we shouldn't lose sight of, and I keep repeating, because at the end of the day, if I have to clean this table and I need $1 to clean it,